Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Unifying Compliance Across Hybrid Clouds, how network and security teams can collaborate to reduce risk. My name is Raleigh Gould. I'm the events manager at EMA, and I will be kicking off today's call. I will start by introducing today's speakers. They are Seamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering network infrastructure and operations at EMA, Tony Dalton, Technical Director at BackBox, and Stephanie Stauk, Director of Product Marketing at BackBox. Stephanie will be moderating today's event. Seamus has nearly 2 decades of experience in the IT industry. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks, including network automation, AIOps-driven network operations, multi-cloud networking, and WAN transformation. Tony leads the strategic efforts at BackBox to strengthen network resilience and security through automation. With more than 20 years of enterprise IT experience, Tony has held senior roles at leading organizations including Sun Microsystems, Oracle, and NetApps. Stephanie is a results-driven technology leader with over 2 decades of experience driving innovation across cybersecurity and cloud landscape. She has led high-performing teams at industry leaders including BackBox, Commvault, Symantec, and Puppet. And before I hand things over to today's speakers, I wanted you to know that you can log questions anytime by using the Q&A functionality. You will also receive an email from EMA later today that will include a link to the on-demand webinar along with some additional resources, so be on the lookout for that email. And now I'd like to turn it over to today's first speaker, Seamus McGillicuddy. Seamus?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Raleigh mentioned at the top, this is a webinar that is entitled Unifying Compliance Across Hybrid Clouds and how network and security teams can collaborate to reduce risk, specifically reducing risk in hybrid clouds. Much of my part of the presentation at the outset of this event will be based on some research that I've been doing throughout the last 4 or 5 years. Most of the data all the data cited in the slides is from research that we've published over the last year or so, examining specifically how network and security teams partner or collaborate, or in some ways, in some cases, converge. And I've been looking at this trend of increased partnerships between those groups for a number of years, and our most recent research on the topic found that 84% of enterprises have observed expanded collaboration between those two groups in recent years. And on the flip side, only 45% of network teams are reporting, or network and security teams are reporting that they are completely successful with those efforts towards partnering together. And I think one of the reasons why there is a challenge around these groups working together is also the driver of why they're working together, which is the complexity that's driven by the cloud. When we ask them in our research, why are you seeing this growth in partnerships and in collaboration between networking and security groups? The number one response was network automation, which is in a way an enabling technology for partnerships. When these groups sort of collaborate on implementation of automation solutions, they improve things like compliance, enforcement of golden configs. They get better at automatically sharing data to drive operations. That's the number one response they gave us. But you see among the 4 secondary drivers that they reported, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. The cloud has for more than a decade been upending IT infrastructure and operations groups and cybersecurity groups because cloud teams often in the past were bypassing them and implementing cloud without a lot of control or governance from the traditional infrastructure and security groups. So what you're seeing these days, networking and security teams often come together and say, hey, let's build guardrails, services that are, that these cloud people can consume that ensure that deploying applications on infrastructure that is secure, reliable, and high performing. So that is what's driving that collaboration. when we look at the challenges that they report, there are two top issues. They're struggling with data quality and authority issues. So the security group has its own source of truth or operational data about what's happening in an enterprise, and the network team has its own. And when they try to compare notes across those two data silos, they see conflicts. Um, they might be collecting data at different intervals. They might have disagreements over what the intent of the network should be. Budget is another one. Um, we don't have the money to buy the tools and hire the training that we need to make sure these groups are working together effectively. And then architectural complexity was the top secondary one. And again, architectural complexity connects directly with the cloud complexity that I was citing earlier as a driver of partnerships between these groups. And then they're also struggling with some like people things like skills gaps and cultural resistance. And then they just lack good tools for working together. They usually have their own tools and they don't want to use each other's tools because they don't understand them, don't know how to use them. Don't The security team might think the networking team's tools are not secure and safe to use, for instance. So, what's the best way to enhance that collaboration between the NetSecOps collaboration, as I describe it in my research, between networking and security groups? Um, I think the first thing that these people should do, especially if they are trying to work together to get a handle on what's happening in hybrid and multi-cloud environments, is get CIO and CISO buy-in and leadership and agenda setting. And what we see in this slide is a chart that reveals um, the policies and programs coming from the top, from the leaders of your organization that have been implemented in recent years to ensure that networking and security groups are working together. The first thing they say is they're implementing shared best practices and workflows for these groups to work together, documenting things, executing things from that documentation, um, documenting how they've worked together in the past, identifying where they're effective. CIOs and CISOs are saying you need to do that so that you guys are, when it's time for you to partner on something, whether it's a, implementation of a infrastructure, or incident response, you're doing it effectively. And incidentally, people who told us that the networking and security groups are more successful at working together were more likely to report that their CIOs and CISOs were pushing that down from above. You see also a lot of people reported that IT leadership is reorganizing their groups and consolidating middle management. When I talk to some people who have a perspective on this type of collaboration, they point to the fact that some directors might be trying to protect their turf and might not encourage their people to work outside their group, or cross a silo and work with the security group or work with the networking group. CIOs and CISOs might be identifying those people and either getting them in line or removing them and consolidating middle management. They're also allocating more budget for things like shared tools. Maybe they're buying a secure access service edge solution to improve the security around their cloud infrastructure. Um, which points to deploying shared tools, which is another big secondary one, new training, hiring more people. Those are all things that are taking place right now. Another thing we recommend and see as a positive step forward in the research that we've done on this topic is you want to enhance compliance management. Network teams often don't have a lot of automation, a lot of proactive efforts around that. They tend to be more reactive. Um, an incident happens, or the security group pushes them to do an audit, or schedules a regular audit, and they were like, oh man, that's some busy work I got to do at the end of each quarter or whatever. But people who are actively monitoring their network for things like compliance and vulnerabilities tend to experience better partnerships between networking and security. 72% of the people that we've surveyed in our research on network and security collaboration, told us that they're monitoring their network for vulnerabilities on a regular basis, like CVEs and PCerts and things like that. And about half of them said they're also monitoring for compliance with config standards, which can go a long way to reducing security risk, improving compliance with regulatory regimes and things like that. In terms of, and it matters like how extensive that compliance monitoring is. As you see on the pie chart on the right-hand side of the slide, a little more than half of the people we surveyed told us that their active monitoring of the compliance posture of their network uh, was complete, as in we monitor most or all elements of our network. So 44% were monitoring many elements, but definitely not all. Like they see their gaps because their tool, it's too expensive to monitor everything. It's too disruptive to monitor everything. And then a small number, 4%, said that they're very limited in how actively they're monitoring things. Maybe they selected certain like high risk parts of their network, but the overall, like most of their network is not actively monitored. And the bottom line is, in our research, the people who reported that they do extensive monitoring of compliance and vulnerabilities, meaning they monitor most, if not all, of the network, they reported the most success between networking and security collaboration. So big recommendation from us, enhance your compliance monitoring. Exchange data across silos. This comes up a lot in my one-on-one conversations with people. Like networking team will say, yeah, sometimes I get these weird requests from the security group, like that I can't possibly fulfill because I get the sense they don't really understand what they're asking of me. Like the request would actually be impossible to fulfill because we just don't have that data. Like, oh, please send me packets. Send me all the packets that crossed all the VLAN borders in our data center. I heard one person say that once. He said that he got a request for that from a security group, and he's like, first of all, I don't do, we don't have that. We couldn't do that unless we wanted to spend a lot of money on storage. So yeah, 96% of the people that we surveyed around networking and security collaboration told us that the security team's need for network data is driving that collaboration. The security team coming to the network team and saying, we know that you know the network best. You should be able to supply to us the data we need so that we can do our job, so that we can, audit things, respond to incidents, look for threats, etc. Like they have their tools and they're collecting data, but a lot of cybersecurity groups have like heritage in being very host based, like protecting hosts, protecting data on hosts. They don't have as much of a history on network data. So they will come to the network team and say, please partner with us on this. One piece of that is, config change alerts. If you have a tool that is monitoring and alerting on unauthorized config changes on switches and routers and so forth, and you might use that in your tooling to try to figure out if that change affects performance or something like that, or is like cutting off someone's access to a service. The security team might think that's a huge vulnerability and they want to understand it. So if you can send those alerts to them and help them correlate it with other things, they will be very grateful. Network telemetry is also a big thing, like early warnings of trouble around. And our research showed that the security group is very interested in these three types of data. They want network flows. They want DNS queries and logs. Stream that to our SIM, please, or our XDR platform, and device logs, changes on switches and routers. Stream that to Splunk for me, please, something like that, or on demand. Don't stream it constantly because that'll get expensive, but stream it when we need it. Things like that. And then another big recommendation for me is automate operations. 91% of the people we surveyed said that network automation tools power NetSecOps collaboration. And this chart here shows you like where they see the opportunities, the biggest opportunities, like what tasks do you most want to automate as part of your efforts to improve collaboration between these groups. Cybersecurity incident response, like the security team needs the network team to be automating things like delivery of data or automating something like, let's isolate this host. Can you do it from your network automation tool? We need to respond to this incident fast. That's the big one. Then, which I kind of alluded to in my examples, but cybersecurity threat isolation or remediation as well. And then after that, network troubleshooting and remediation. The big thing I often see in my research over the years is quite often a network performance or health issue that, or more of like an IT service issue that kicks off a war room response where like network infrastructure operations and cloud and data center operation, all these groups come together and sort of try to troubleshoot an issue that's complex and they can't quickly find the root cause. Quite often that issue is created actually by a cybersecurity issue. Like it's an attack. It's an attack that's happening. Network operations might be responding to it as like a performance issue that's affecting productivity or whatever, and they're like, all right, let's try to figure out what this is, and then they figure out it's an attack. It'd be good if they're automating network troubleshooting remediation as much as possible so that they can get to that quickly and notify security if security is not already aware of it. And compliance reporting, people always saying like, oh, geez, audits are such busy work. Can we automate that as much as possible? Being able to automate that is a big time saver and also just makes compliance checks and reporting more effective if you've got a good automation tool in place. So we've talked about how the networking and security groups can work better together. Let's talk about how they can overcome multi-cloud complexity together. So hybrid and multi-cloud complexity is rising. We already talked about the fact that cloud is a driver of networking and security groups working together, but it's also just increasing complexity, as I sort of alluded to already. And the state of enterprise cloud complexity is becoming extensive. In our most recent research that looked at sort of network operations in general, 56% of network infrastructure operations professionals told us that they are now multi-cloud, and 51% of them said they are now supporting a hybrid cloud. And there's a lot of overlap between those two circles. Like there's a lot of them that are hybrid multi-cloud. That's a lot of complexity. Only 30% of enterprises are completely effective at managing networking and security across those environments, according to our research. So how can network and security groups come together and reduce that complexity? Step one, smash the cloud silos. So our research has found that when I've done specific research on hybrid multi-cloud networking strategy, and we found that cloud native networking and security tools often dominate cloud networks. So they're in AWS, they're consuming AWS native networking security services. Now they're multi-cloud, they're in Azure. They're consuming Azure's native networking and security services. They still have a data center footprint that has a third existing incumbent tool set around all that. That's 3 silos. We are seeing enterprises with 3 to 4 clouds these days. There's an emerging market of GPU as a service providers that are probably going to make their way into enterprise adoption and become another cloud environment, as enterprises embrace AI investments. So management of silos between clouds and data centers between individual clouds and between clouds and data centers, really hard. It's hard to have consistent approaches to security policy, config and design standards, things like that. And our research shows that most people who are supporting hybrid multi-cloud networks, they want to centralize and unify management of networking and security as much as possible. The priorities for that sort of silo reduction are on the right. They want to have a unified approach to network security policies and controls across their data centers and their clouds. They want to unify IP address space, managing that so they can reduce overlaps and things like that. They want to centrally manage cloud ingress and egress, just to make sure that they have consistent controls around that. And they want to unify DNS, which is always a source of sprawl in networks today. Step 2, improve observability. 70% of the enterprises that we survey tell us that they're using their cloud providers' tools for cloud network observability. So they're using things like AWS CloudWatch, which is a nice dashboard, but it doesn't really get you a lot of deep insights. They might be using VPC flow logs from AWS and trying to import that into a tool that typically monitors net flow, things like that. And you think about they're using, so they're using multiple cloud providers. They're using multiple cloud providers tools for network observability. Again, no end-to-end insights across those clouds and their data centers where their incumbent tools are. We recommend that you update your traditional network observability tools for end-to-end visibility across your network. You don't want to have a siloed monitoring stack just for your cloud. It's got to be end-to-end. And enterprises that told us that they adapt their traditional network monitoring tools, the tools that they use to monitor their on-prem networks like their data center, they have more success with hybrid multi-cloud operations. Step 3, establish a cloud source of truth. What is a source of truth? You may have heard it, especially if you're looking at like network automation as a project. Now, it comes up a lot as like the place where you have all the data you need to drive automation, all the operational data. It is a centralized and or federated repository of all network-related data in the cloud, in this context of a cloud source of truth. It is also, if it's a network source of truth, it's all network-related data. But in this context, it is network-related data about your hybrid multi-cloud. Having all that data available to you in a central area, whether it's like one tool or it's a tool that's syncing with multiple authoritative sources of record, systems of record, means that when you are trying to do some kind of operation, whether it's troubleshooting or deploying a service or auditing something, like all the data you need should be automatically in a central place. Like I need to find everything I need to know about this switch. I need to know all network related information about this application. It should all be there. And it enables our automation, but also enables a lot of overall operations, streamlines operations. Enterprises that told us that they had a comprehensive source of truth about their hybrid multi-cloud network were more effective at managing that network. And we asked them, like, what benefits do you get from such a source of truth? And on the right, you see the number one response was better network data quality. And remember, in one of my earlier slides, one of the things that is the biggest number one challenge to network and security compliance, network and security collaboration is data quality and data authority issues. So a source of truth directly counters that. Number 2, they get better network visibility. They just know what's happening on their network. Not only that better data, but they just like, you understand what your network is meant to look like and how it works, And then the number 3 benefit, which is kind of flows out of those first 2, is reduce security risk. Like if you have all that data in front of you, like you can see, like you can start to see, you can sort of put the pieces together and understand like where are your gaps, where are your compliance violations. Close those loops and reduce security risk. So key takeaways. Network and security teams are working together to solve hybrid multi-cloud complexity, among other things. They're not necessarily finding it easy to do that, but keys to a good NetSecOps partnership are executive buy-in, especially executives who say, hey, let's implement some best practices and procedures and processes for how you're going to work together, since you aren't practiced at that. You don't necessarily even understand what the other group does or why they do it. So let's document it in this is what we're doing and this is why we do it. Compliance monitoring. Actively monitor your network for compliance. The more extensive, the better. Share data and understand, and also talk to each other about what it means to have to get that data. Because if if the security team thinks that you need to provide them with complete packet captures of huge parts of your network on a regular basis, you got to get into a budget conversation with them, because cybersecurity teams often have more budget, and be like, hey, if you want this level of data retention, you gotta work with us on the budget issue, because we don't have it. And then automate, implement automation. 9 out of 10 people say automation is key to these partnerships. And network security teams that are working together effectively can then reduce cloud complexity by eliminating those cloud silos that I talked about, like getting some common approaches to architecture across all your environments, boosting observability of those environments with better tools. Don't rely on the native tools of your cloud providers, and establishing a source of truth about your cloud network. All right, so with that, I think I'm ready to turn over to Stephanie.
Great, thanks, Seamus. You shared some really great insights, especially into how to improve collaboration in between these teams. With that in mind, obviously, I have some questions for you before we pass this over to Tony. So, Tony, you're going to have to wait a second. First, I'd really like to understand, the biggest misconceptions about NetSecOps that you encounter as you're talking to these teams. And also, Tony, I do want you to jump in, because I'm pretty sure that you've had quite a few of these conversations as well.
Okay, I can start. I think one of the biggest uh, misconceptions is that cultural conflicts will undermine collaboration. Um, there are cultural differences, but it's more about skills and knowledge gaps than cultural issues. Like, one side doesn't necessarily understand why the other side is asking for things or what they do. Like, I've talked to people in network engineering and operations groups who were like, one of the biggest problems I had with working with those groups, I just didn't really understand why certain things mattered to them. And I realized that it was a knowledge gap. It wasn't that necessarily we had different cultures. It's just that we didn't know each other's priorities, tools, environments. Formalized interaction between groups breaks that barrier down. He said that just having monthly meetings with his colleagues from the other side of the silo, helped him understand that. And then once you know why the other side is doing things and what's important to them, then you start to set common goals that you can pursue together. So when security team says, "Oh, we need to do compliance this way," or "We need to implement this policy," and the network team's like, "But that's going to break things, or it's too much work. Why are they so annoying?" uh, just understanding why they do things makes you realize that it was a knowledge gap, not a cultural barrier that you just can't work with these people.
Yeah, I think there's some really great points there, Seamus. And from my perspective, if I think back to previous lives working in and around network teams, security teams, the two just didn't talk to each other, right? You're right. There's a huge cultural difference. One thought the other was better. They just didn't gel. They didn't bond. I think these days a lot of the conversations that I have at BackBox here, and perhaps this is because we're an automation platform, and we're probably working with slightly more mature organizations in that respect. The network and security teams are already talking because they've found a common problem to solve, and we're helping them solve that. So what we see now, and I think to reinforce your point about the need for closer collaboration, is I see day to day network and security teams working together and becoming stronger. So I think if you look to the past, to the old way of doing things, they were very much siloed and inefficient. But I see that changing regularly these days.
Great, thank you both. So I've got one more question for you. And here I really want to emphasize on what you were hitting on, Seamus, just a little bit earlier around the importance of having that source of truth. And I know this is something that we discuss with our customers as well. So I'm sure Tony's got some valuable insights on this one too. So my question for you then is, what are ways organizations can ensure complete visibility over their network infrastructure, especially when they use all these different tools in different environments?
So ask your vendors to provide you with integrations with other systems of record. Like when we ask people what do you consider a system that plays in your source of truth, they mention like lots of different tools, right? Like there's a tool like BackBox, but there's a lot of other stuff too. Like there's your DDI vendor that has like IP address space, maybe a little bit of inventory information, DNS and DHCP information, a CMDB, which the network team might not love because it doesn't have great discovery of their network often. IT service management tools. They want good APIs, supported integrations, so they can sort of synchronize data across repositories. And also, you need people that can leverage whatever APIs your vendors offer to sort of do those integrations on your own if you have to. So you want some skills around that. So I think that's one of the big things. And also, well, I mean, the first thing you need to do is you need to understand what data you want in that source of truth, because like there's a lot of things that can go into it as well. It can be intent data. It can also be network state data. Maybe you want those separated. Maybe you want them together so you can compare them. But I think integration is the first thing that I recommend.
Yeah, fully agree. Integration is key, and that's one of the things that we encourage very strongly here. So if you mentioned this very well, Seamus, you know, sharing data, integrating with adjacent systems and tool sets. If you think about all of the different vendors that most enterprises have, you know, there's tens of vendors to deal with there, lots of different administration platforms, lots of orchestration platforms, all kinds of different tooling. If they can't talk to each other, you become wholly inefficient. That has to become a manual process. You've got to have an engineer sat there looking at tool A and tool B and tool C. If you can't tie those together programmatically, then you're already falling behind, and operationally you're extremely inefficient. So the more that you can integrate, if we think about source of truth, there's never going to be one complete source of truth. It's going to be aggregated somewhere within your enterprise, but you need reliable tools that can programmatically interact with that central source of truth. So with BackBox, for example, you know, we like to consider ourselves the network source of truth, and we integrate very tightly with CMDBs, asset management, etc., to help our customers manage that entire life cycle. So yeah, I guess integration is key for me too. That's one of the most important things.
Great, thank you both. And I actually think this is an excellent segue into BackBox. So with that, let's have Tony show us how BackBox can help.
Okay, so great. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about BackBox. And just to start at a high level before we jump into the demo itself, we've also done plenty of research. We're a very market and customer led organization. Everything that we do within our platform is based on demand or demand that we see coming. So we talk to obviously a lot of analysts like Seamus and a lot of existing customers or prospective customers, and data that we've commissioned tells us that 33% of enterprises have deployed or will deploy SASE within 24 months. When we start to think about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, various different locations where you can have your systems and your data reside, this isn't a problem that's going to go away anytime soon, right? The rise of the hyperscalers started about 10 years ago. They've been extremely disruptive for mostly excellent reasons, and they've brought some great results. But this is just an evolution, right? If you think back 20 years ago, before the hypervisor was really thought of or implemented within enterprises, there was a huge shift when we went from bare metal into a hypervisor or virtualized environment. This is just another one of those shifts. We go into the hyperscalers. It's really just, it's somebody else's data center. It's another location for your infrastructure to reside. So how do you tie all that together? Now, if you think about the last 10 years and the rush into cloud, everybody's either embracing or thinking about it or trying to embrace the cloud. Quite often there's a rush to get to cloud because of whatever mandate that's coming down the line. And that can create a sense of urgency and a very rushed deployment implementation, and at least a sprawl. So sprawl isn't anything new either to the IT world, obviously, but you've gone from disparate siloed infrastructure within a bunch of data centers to now up in the cloud as well. And how do you manage that? So we talked earlier on, Seamus mentioned about all the disparate tool sets you might have to look at. You're probably working with with many vendors, and so you need a single consolidated view across all of those environments. That's extremely important. And as we start to see the move more towards secure access service edge, that's only going to get more important in the network and security space. So when you think about how do I get a view on my environment, how do I understand the topology, where these things are, how do I keep my asset database maintained, how do I protect this environment as well? 40,000 CVEs were published last year alone, a 38% increase from 2023. That's massive. AI is driving a lot of this, obviously, but you've still got to respond to it. Network and security teams are struggling. They're underwater with all of the day-to-day tasks that they have to carry out, and now they've got to defend against all these CVEs as well. And how do you do that proactively, or at least respond and react very, very quickly? Typically you might receive a report from the security team, from the pen test team or whatever, and they'll send you a list of devices that they want you to go and look at. You've then got to spend hours and hours working through that list, figuring out if a particular CV is relevant to you or not, because you don't have context at your fingertips to those devices that you're trying to manage, be they in the cloud or on premises. And then 56% of breaches resulted from a known and unaddressed vulnerability. So we're not just talking about that 0-day CVE that gets released tomorrow. It might be something that was released 4 years ago that you just don't know about because your asset inventory is out of date. It might well be in a spreadsheet on someone's desktop. Hopefully it isn't, but it happens. So how do you even understand your environment well enough to understand how you're affected by vulnerabilities and things like non-compliance? So as it says here, the journey can be bumpy, and you've got to try and get your arms around this stuff. So if we think about modern network infrastructure from a cyber resilience perspective, it's complex enough once you start to throw in different topologies, different deployment methods, different locations, cloud, public cloud, private cloud, on premises. You've really got to wrap your arms around that. And again, this comes down to understanding your infrastructure, understanding where everything sits. If you don't have a very clear baseline and accurate view on how your environment looks, how your enterprise is running, then you're going to get off to a very difficult start. Too many tools. Seamus mentioned this a few times. Again, multi-vendor environments. I've yet to meet a customer who focuses on just one vendor, because you simply can't for many reasons. So you've got lots and lots of disparate tool sets. That just complicates things even further. Not only from an operational management perspective, but from an asset tracking perspective as well. You've got to pull information from all of these different places. And when we talk about integration and DevOps, right? You could have a very capable DevOps team focused on just how to manage the day-to-day asset management when they should be doing more important things. So if you can consolidate your tool sets down into something that can handle most or all of this for you, you can free up those very expensive, very clever resources to go and do something a little bit more complex, perhaps integrating end-to-end workflows, that kind of thing. And then finally, limited visibility. Again, assuming that you have a good idea on the baseline of your infrastructure, you understand what it looks like. How do you get visibility into your risk, your exposure? How do you measure compliance? Can you even measure compliance today? Do you have a golden configuration standard that you need to adhere to? Everybody says yes, but configurations drift over time. So how do you track that? How do you get visibility into that? A lot of the customers and partners and prospects that I speak to every day, particularly the prospects, they're still doing this manually. They've still got a team of engineers logging into switches to make sure the configuration is as expected. And you're always going to have gaps, and gaps bring risk and exposure to vulnerabilities that you weren't aware of or weren't aware that you're exposed to. So there's a huge challenge in front of us. And then how do we overcome that challenge? Well, wouldn't you know, we can help you with that. If we think about the BackBox Network Cyber Resilience platform, and I'll take you through it at a fairly quick pace, and then jump into a demo to show you what's new in 8.0, which we've just GA'd. So our platform works on 3 levels basically, and the base level is foundational. It's geared around automated lifecycle management. So this is where, you know, consider if you're a growing enterprise, you're growing through acquisition or natural expansion, perhaps you're a service provider taking on new customers. You need to onboard devices very, very quickly. Now, onboarding them quickly is one thing, but you've got to be able to onboard them quickly enough to reduce that period of risk, that window of risk that you have when you're onboarding something new. You don't quite understand how exposed you are to risk, non-compliance, and all of those kind of things. So one of the things that BackBox can help you with is quickly onboard these devices, run them through the automation platform, take a backup, you know, make sure that you can recover. Obviously, that's your first, your last point of reference. If anything disastrous happens, then you need to be able to restore. But importantly, onboard the devices, take inventory, and get a baseline of where you are. From there, you can jump up and down the platform. You may decide that you need to, apply some configuration patches. You might want to push your golden configuration out onto these devices to get them compliant to your requirements. You might need to upgrade them to either, get up to your particular standards or to protect against a CVE that you already know about. So these things we can help you with. We've got automation workflows built into the platform today. You can take them, use them as templates, make them your own, and really increase your operational efficiency in that respect. If we pop up into the second layer of the platform, configuration, compliance, and policy management, this is where we start to talk about source of truth or network source of truth. So every time we touch a device, every time we back up a device, we'll take inventory. We know what vendor model version it is. We can gather all sorts of information from that device for you. And we can integrate very tightly with CMDB, with various adjacent and related tool sets and other sources of truth. So we can help you keep track of your asset and inventory automatically every day. If you run a backup every day, we can update every day. What this means is you're not having to manually manage spreadsheets, or you haven't got to rely on an engineer to upgrade a device and then go into a CMDB somewhere and update a field. That will happen automatically for you. If we think about compliance and policy management, hardening frameworks, we have pre-built automations based around things like CIS and NIST. We've just, as part of 8.0, introduced device inventory and configuration comparison reports, which help with DORA reporting, for example. So we're all about making sure that you can proactively stay on top of compliance. You can detect any change in compliance, any non-compliance, and we can even help you automatically remediate that should you choose to. Obviously, there are change management requirements there to consider, but know that we can do that for you. And then on the top layer of the platform, network infrastructure integrity, this is where we start to really bring things together. So we can give you a very real and very accurate feed on vulnerability intelligence. So where are my devices exposed? What risk am I facing from a vulnerability perspective? We go out every night and we pull information from various sources, NVD, NIST, CISA, all of the vendors that we cover, 180 vendors out of the box. We pull all of that information in, and if you've ever done this manually, as I'm sure you probably have, you'll know how incomplete or inconsistent some of this data can be. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes to normalize the data, get into a more usable format, and then we'll compare that against your inventory. And we'll give you a really quick and easy view into your risk levels. We'll help you prioritize your risks so that you understand where to get your teams to work, first of all. Obviously, we're an automation platform so that you can fold all of that straight back into the automation engine and automatically upgrade a device that's exposed to a CVE, for example. So those are really the key elements of our platform. We are entirely API driven as well, so fully REST based. So again, integration, we are all about integration. If you've got adjacent tool sets that you want to consider, we can help you integrate those. We've got some built in today. We can talk to ServiceNow. We've recently added Meraki support as well. So the integration possibilities are almost endless. And again, you can use the platform here to take care of the day-to-day mundane automation or operational activities that your teams shouldn't necessarily be doing. You know, you can put them to work in more important and more challenging areas. Okay, so this is the BackBox platform. Again, this is version 8.0. This was GA'd this week, Wednesday, I believe. So you're seeing something new and shiny. We've made some significant updates to the platform. Again, we are very customer and market led. Everything that we do is based on a very real need that we see in the market. So some of the key things that we've added here around device lifecycle governance, excuse me. So we've added a platform homepage here, which I'll show you in just a moment some more. Device lifecycle states, Meraki device management, very, very important, and we'll get into why. From a network infrastructure integrity perspective, the CVE on the top of the platform there, we've added CVE workarounds, so we can not only give you an idea of your risk and exposure, but we can very quickly give you any mitigation or remediation steps that the vendor has provided. So again, expose the problem and help you work through that problem very, very quickly. From a compliance and policy management perspective, I mentioned the DORA reports earlier. We've enhanced our device inventory and config comparison capabilities to help with that compliance requirements. And then from an enterprise platform perspective, some things that we don't necessarily get into too much today, but you know, we deploy agents for remote customer sites, for example. We've got a very secure, hardened part of that now, so that we can reverse agent communications, which really support zero trust network architecture. So if you're a service provider or you're a large enterprise with remote sites, just know that we've got you covered from a zero trust perspective. You can still communicate with devices at remote locations, whether that's in the cloud or on somebody else's premises. You can do that very securely and adopting a zero trust principle. And then just finally, we've added an event log viewer, which we can, and Seamus touched on this earlier on actually, event driven responsives and reactiveness. So if we detect a device configuration change, for example, we can be alerted via SNMP, syslog, and we can trigger an automation based on that. So that might be a compliance check to make sure that device remains compliant. It might be something else. You can just fold all of that back into the platform. So let me talk a little bit here about the homepage. First of all, again, very demand, market, and customer led. When we start to think about visibility, how do I get visibility into my hybrid environment? Could be devices in the cloud, on premises, etc. The first and foremost thing I want to be able to do is just get a view on status. So where am I today? And if we look up here at the device coverage piece, from a life cycle perspective, how many of the devices that I have in BackBox today are being backed up? 89%. Well, that's probably okay, because I might have some lab devices. How many task automations am I running? How many configurations am I pushing? How many patches? Compliance, how many devices am I actually running compliance checks against? And how many of those succeed? We've also added a compliance status, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then from a vulnerability perspective, am I covering all of my devices with my vulnerability checks? In this case, no. So that could be a problem. This can take you down into various different views. Just know that you can drill in and get very specific views customized for these particular elements. From a compliance perspective, how many am I covering, but what does that coverage really mean? So I've got 20 some devices in this. I'm not checking 13 of those at all. That's a problem. I should be checking those for compliance regularly. Of the ones that I do check, 5 of those has failed. So again, I've got a problem. Something there is non-compliant. I need to go and fix that. And fantastic, one of those is passing with flying colors. So that's really good news. And then just finally, from a vulnerability perspective, again, top level view, understand where you are. What do I really care about today? What do I need to care about? So I've got a bunch of devices without CVEs. That's fantastic. They're protected. 6 without CVEs, and I've got 8 with CVEs associated. I can drill in here and I can see, well, what are those CVEs? And this will show me very quickly. I can open up here. So there's a 10 here on Cisco ICE. I really need to get to this. And by the way, this device is end of life. It went end of life in 2018. Why haven't I replaced this yet? This one here, this is also an ICE, so we've got a bunch here. If I pop back up into here, there's one of these in the wild. We'll also tell you, so if there's a CV being actively exploited, we can get you that information very, very quickly. You can just drill into here and you can see that. So this is a Palo Alto. Back into the automation platform, I can fold this straight into a task job, and I can click save, click play, and I can go and upgrade these devices. So again, we'll give you your exposure, we'll show you your risk, and we'll help you close that risk really, really quickly. So I think that's probably enough for me. Let me just talk quickly about Meraki actually before I do stop. I'm sorry. So we have just added Meraki integration. Again, market-led, demand-led. You can now quickly go out. You can configure BackBox to talk to your Meraki Cloud Controller. We'll go and interrogate that on a scheduled basis whenever you want us to, and we'll pull down inventory information. So we will pull those into, if I just go into my devices view here, as you can see, I've got 19 devices in various locations. Some of them are cloud-based, some of them are on-prem, and I've got 3 Meraki devices here, a firewall, an access point, and a switch. So I can pull that information in really quickly. If one of these drops out of the cloud controller, the Meraki cloud controller, I lose visibility of that device. Well, with BackBox, what we'll do is we'll drop that into an orphan state. So you can plant that into an orphan state. If and when it comes back at the cloud controller, we'll move it back into an active life cycle. If it doesn't, you've still got a record of that. We'll keep it there for 30 days. You can change that if you want to. So just know that we can cover on-prem, cloud-based, whatever location you have these devices. If we can talk to them, we can help you, and we can give you a really nice consolidated view and help you understand the baseline. So I think that's probably enough from me, Steph. I could talk for hours on this stuff. Please, if you want more information, just let us know.
Great. Well, thank you, Tony. Awesome information. While our attendees are collecting their thoughts on everything, both of you have shared today, I do want to take a moment to reiterate what Raleigh mentioned at the beginning of our time here together. A follow-up email will be sent out with access to the on-demand playback of this webinar. Also, if you want to learn more about BackBox and spend a little more time taking a look at the demo, see our platform in action, I encourage you to visit our website at backbox.com and request a demo. So with that, let me take a look at some of these questions that come in. And with the time we've got left, let me see how many I can get to. The first one's about automation. And this one really caught my attention as well. Tony, when you mentioned the importance of automation, and even more so when, Seamus shared a stat around, I think earlier, indicating that over 90% of IT pros believe network automation tools support NetSecOps collaboration. That is really 90%. That's awesome. So with that, I'm going to get to the question. So I know automation can initially make engineers just a little bit nervous, a little fidgety here. How do you overcome the hurdle of trusting automation? Who'd like to take that one?
What a nice
I
start.
can-
Unless you want to go,
yeah.
Seamus?
Yeah, go ahead. You can start.
Okay. I would say consider it a journey, Steph. There's no quick way to get to the end of your path in automation. We need to take incremental steps and learn along the way. So the first thing to do, I would say, is you need to build trust in the platform that you select. You need to understand it, learn it. You need to have very clear workflows, clearly documented workflows. If it's repeatable, you can automate it. So I would say start out with something small. Think about compliance checks. They're very easy to implement. And don't worry about the complicated stuff, because it will get more complex. But as you learn and as you move along that journey, you'll become more and more confident with it, and you'll build that trust along the way, which is important. We have customers today who started out just backing up, and they do the occasional upgrade just one at a time. They've got entire teams running upgrades, day and night. They've now got, instead of one engineer overseeing perhaps one or executing 1 or 2 automations, they've got a single engineer upgrade or overseeing 30 upgrades at a time. So their operational efficiency has just blown out of the water. It's incredible.
Yeah, Tony, I agree with all that. A couple of small things that I've learned in my years of talking to people about this one-on-one. I talk to a lot of network automation architects and engineers. One thing they tell me is like, don't tell network engineers that they can't use CLI anymore, command line interface. I mean, they feel they're very efficient in using CLI in certain operations. Like, hey, you're telling me I can only go through this automation tool. I can't like interface into individual devices anymore. But CLI is like my favorite way of getting this kind of data out of a device. Like can I just keep doing that? So let them continue to work the way they used to in certain ways, and you can use the automation tools to, and ensure that like whatever they do manually is compliant and error free. The
Yeah.
other thing I hear from people is like a network automation engineer, when they're first starting out, they'll like go to the network team and say, "What do you hate doing? What are you doing all the time that you wish was automated?" Because they're gonna have to think of something, and you can target that, and then they have a positive experience, and it changes their attitude towards automation. They're like, "Wow, this has made my life easier." Then you can start to sort of they embrace and then they start asking like, "Can you automate this too?" So that's a good path to follow.
Great, thank you. So, okay, I've got another good question for you. And given the time, I think I'm going to have to make this one the final question. And it's all about AI. And in fact, I feel like you can't discuss any of this without mentioning AI. And I know both of you touched on it a bit. So, as AI and automation become increasingly integrated into network security, how can businesses effectively and affordably, yes, utilize these technologies to enhance security and just overall network performance?
I'll start on this one since Tony got to take the start on the other one. Um, well, in terms of affordability, a lot of vendors are a lot of your vendors have recognized that AI is a path towards innovation and added value in their products. They're not always going to ask you to pay a premium for that AI. It's going to depend on the use case, the level of investment, and the existing type of investment you already have with your vendors. But in terms of affordability, like a lot of vendors that I talk to are trying to differentiate by including AI in what they already offer you. Others will have a higher license tier um, for the AI capabilities. And if that's the case, you can negotiate with your vendors and say, hey, I really want to try this AI stuff, but can we have some sort of discount to make sure that I am getting value out of it? Maybe like an interim discount, something like that. There's negotiations to be had. In terms of ensuring that personnel actually use it, look for AI capabilities that are good at like showing their work. I've seen lots of demos of network and security focused AI that it really like conversationally presents what it's seeing, what it's analyzing, how it gets its conclusions, and makes recommendations. Um, and that's how you build trust. But because it allows, if it's showing its work and showing like, here's what I analyzed, people who might be dubious can kind of recreate the work and say, yeah, that's right. So show like it's about trust, building trust through showing your work.
Yeah, good points. I would say, speaking from a vendor perspective, and I talk with the product and engineering teams all the time about this stuff, this is a very hot topic on everyone's roadmap, ours included. Our view it around AI and its implementation is using it to accelerate outcomes, right? It's a fantastic way to accelerate whatever it is that you're trying to do. You need guardrails, obviously, and you have to make sure that they're good guardrails. But the way I see AI helping a platform like BackBox is how can we use it to augment the customer experience? And that could be something around, perhaps guiding them through writing their own automation or helping them gain greater insights even faster into their infrastructure. So those are the kind of conversations that we're having. And I think that's the kind of progress that we'll start to see with our platform and others. And honestly, I think that AI will become table stakes at some point. If you're not using it, then you're no longer differentiating, you're falling behind.
Very, very good points, definitely. Well, thanks, Seamus and Tony, for taking the questions and sharing your insights. I also want to thank, the audience today for taking the time out of your schedules to join us. Really, really key to have you here. And a big thank you to everyone who submitted their questions. We did get more questions, but we will be sure to follow up on any that come through if we are unable to address them during our time here today. Also, as I mentioned, there's going to be a follow-up email from EMA with access to other resources as well as a recording of this webinar. And thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.